Wow, we've got a great crowd, everybody. It is so good to see all of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nathaniel Stinnett. I am the executive director of the Environmental Voter Project, and we've got a lot of great stuff to share with you today. We are going to be talking about new congressional maps. We're going to be talking about recent polling data. And as always, we are definitely going to be talking about get out the vote campaigns. So, this is what you have in store today. First, I'm going to give a very, very brief intro to our work at the Environmental Voter Project for those of you who are new to us. Then we're going to get into just an overview of what this upcoming referendum is about. Then we're going to get into this new congressional map, what the changes are and what it might mean for electoral politics. I'm going to show you the latest polling on the upcoming referendum. And then, of course, how we at the Environmental Voter Project are mobilizing voters for this April 21st referendum and how you can get involved. And then finally, as Peter mentioned, we will have a brief Q&A at the end. And so for those of you who are just joining us, if you have a question as we go along, please put your questions in that Q&A folder. If they are not answered in that Q&A folder, it's likely because they're being held so that the questions can be asked of me at the end. We're going to keep this webinar to a short 45 minutes to respect all of your time, and we've got a lot of good stuff to get to. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know about our work at the Environmental Voter Project, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit that is laser focused on finding people who care deeply about climate and the environment who don't vote, and then turning them into new voters and eventually consistent voters. That's all. That's what we do. We don't endorse candidates. We don't lobby for particular policies. We don't even try to get people to care more about climate or the environment. A good way to think about our work is we're not in the mind changing or opinion changing business. Instead, we're in the behavior changing business. We identify people who are already with us. They already care so deeply about climate and the environment that it's their number one priority, yet they're not voting. And that means we can just make this purely behavioral intervention. And very briefly, we do this through a four-step process. First, identification. We work with data scientists to build predictive models on voter files. And very quickly, what these things are is they're a tool where we survey thousands of people, look at all the data we have on the people who say that climate is their number one priority, and then try to find more people like them. And after a long iterative process, what we're able to do is assign a score to every voter in the voter file, helping us identify which voters are the most likely to not just care about climate and the environment, but literally list it as their number one priority over all other issues. Then, once we find those super environmentalists, we don't need data scientists to tell us which ones of them are good voters and which ones aren't good voters. That's public record. So then we isolate those non-voting environmentalists, and that lets us get to step two, which is mobilization. Because we now don't need to spend our time and effort on educating these voters or persuading them to care about climate and the environment, we can just deliver pure behavior change messaging. And so we canvass and call and send postcards and direct mail and digital ads, all to just these non-voting environmentalists. And we run hundreds of randomized control trials each year telling us which messages work best, just to do one thing and one thing only, and that is get them to vote. Third, we are about building good long-term voting habits. And so we don't just focus on the big, sexy elections. We focus on every election, big and small, local, state, and federal, because every election is an opportunity to build good voting habits. Because ultimately, step four, our goal is not just to change the calculus in an election here and there, but rather our goal is to change the electorate. We want to so dramatically increase the number of environmentalists who regularly vote that politicians have no choice but to lead on climate. Not out of the goodness of their hearts, not because it's right, but rather because they're forced to for their political survival. Because we all know that there is nothing that motivates politicians more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. So they always end up going where the voters are. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure there are as many environmentalists voting as possible. To give you just a quick overview of the results that we've gotten, we run all of our campaigns through randomized control trials. So what that means is we set aside a control group so that after the election, we can compare turnout among the low propensity voters we've targeted to some people we've set aside in a control group. And what we know is that in presidential general elections, we've increased turnout among our targets by as much as 1.8 percentage points over our control group. In other statewide elections, it's getting closer to 4 percentage points. And in local elections, it's almost at 6 percentage points. If these don't seem like big numbers to you, ask Kamala Harris how big a deal 1.8% is in a presidential general, and she'll tell you. These numbers are everything, everything in politics. And since we launched now almost 10 years ago, we've been able to communicate with almost 13 million unique low propensity environmental voters, all of whom were pretty awful voters, or we wouldn't be talking to them, right? And what we can see on voter files, because we're tracking their voting history, is that now well over 2 million of them are voting so consistently that they have voted in their most recent federal election, their most recent state election, and even their most recent local election. They have become super voters. We are enormously proud of these results, and all of you as volunteers and donors should also be very proud of them. Okay, I told you this would only be a very, very quick overview of our work. If you want to learn more about our work at the Environmental Voter Project, there'll be a link in the chat where you can see a long introduction video which goes into real depth on how we identify voters, the messaging we use to mobilize them, how we measure our results, things like that. So please make sure to find that link in the chat. All right. In 2026, we are active in 21 states. In those 21 states, we have identified 3.4 million of these low propensity environmental voters who we're mobilizing this year, each of whom are already registered to vote. So they've already passed that hurdle. They're highly likely to list climate or the environment as their number one priority. And we know that they're unlikely to vote this fall based on their previous voting history. These are the people we are targeting this year. And as all of you know, for the rest of this webinar, we're just going to be talking about one of these states, and that's Virginia, because there is a supremely important referendum coming up in Virginia on April 21st. So let's immediately jump into that. All right, so what's going on April 21st? Well, the first is Virginia is having mid-decade redistricting, or rather they're having a referendum to see whether they can have mid-decade redistricting. This is similar to what you've likely heard about in California or Texas or some other states. So on April 21st, what's being voted on is whether to amend their state constitution to allow this mid-decade redistricting. Now, voters themselves will not be voting on a particular map, but the General Assembly in Virginia, their state legislature, has already released a map. And so we do know what that new map will look like. Election Day, as I mentioned, is on Tuesday, April 21st, and Virginia has the biggest early voting window of any state in the nation. And so early voting has already begun. It has already been happening for a week. And finally, as some of you might have seen, there has been an enormous amount of litigation over this. And so the state Supreme Court in Virginia has not decided whether this will be a valid election. I know that is just crazy. But here's the situation. In order to amend the state constitution in Virginia, the state legislature needs to vote to approve a constitutional amendment. Then, in its next sitting, so after the next election, it needs to vote again to approve that state constitutional amendment. And then it needs to go to the voters in a referendum like this. Now, what happened was last fall, the state legislature in Virginia voted to approve this constitutional amendment. And then the new legislature also approved it. But there was a lawsuit filed saying that because the first vote took place shortly after early voting had already begun last fall, that technically that means it was too late. It means the election had already happened last fall. That is just one of the lawsuits. There are also some lawsuits about the language of the referendum, the actual ballot question. There's so many lawsuits there. The Virginia State Supreme Court said, hey, listen, we're not going to be able to decide these on time. We are saying that this election must go forward. The referendum will go forward. We will hear arguments and decide after the fact. Personally, I think it's highly unlikely that if this referendum passes, that the Virginia State Supreme Court will have the guts to say, oh, just kidding, even though you all voted for this change, we're going to deny it. But I'm sure as hell not going to become a Virginia State Supreme Court prognosticator. So what do I know? What I do know is this is an enormous political opportunity for change. Some would even argue this is the single most important election that's happening in 2026, and I'm going to get to why. When we look at the new map that is being proposed here, 4 of Virginia's 11 districts would go from red to blue. Another way of putting this is they would go from districts that voted for Donald Trump to districts that voted for Kamala Harris. That is an enormous shift, almost as large as the Republican mid-decade redistricting that took place in Texas, where people think anywhere from 4 to 5 seats were shifted red. Now, I don't expect many of you to have memorized the current congressional map in Virginia, so let's go into a little bit more detail about what this new map would look like, what the partisan shift would be, and what those changes would be. The new map would make one district even more deep red than it already is, and that's the 9th district. In order to do that, it would take a lot of districts that are medium to dark blue and make them light blue. Another way of looking at it is like this. The current map, you can see here. The current map, it has 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans. You'll see some of the current map has a really light red district. There are also some really light blue districts. And what these numbers mean, +5, +1, those are the margins that Trump or Harris won by in November of 2025. The new map would look like this furthest right column. And so you'll see it would go from being a 6 to 5 Democratic advantage to being a 10 to 1 Democratic advantage. But some people might claim this is kind of risky for Democrats because boy, are there a lot of close light blue districts there. But ultimately, there are 4 districts, 4 red districts that go from either leaning red or very red to leaning blue. And that is accomplished by making one district, the 9th, even more red than it is, but also taking some pretty easy dark blue districts, taking some Democratic votes from them and putting them into these other districts. All right. So how does the polling look, right? I mean, early voting has already been going on for a week. And the headline is, nobody knows what the hell is going to happen here. So let's walk through the 2 nonpartisan public polls that are out there. And unfortunately, they're not going to tell us much. From January 13th to January 20th, so the poll was in the field for those 8 days, there was a poll of registered voters by CNU that showed by 8 percentage points people supported this referendum to change the map. Okay, first off, a poll of registered voters is a pretty big oversample, right? I don't guarantee much. I don't prognosticate much, but I'm willing to bet my house on the fact that not every single registered voter in Virginia is going to vote in this redistricting referendum in the middle of the spring. So that's a big, big oversample. Moreover, that poll was taken before the map was even released. The map was released on February 5th. Okay, after the map was released, another poll was done, the only other poll that we've got. That showed people opposing this constitutional amendment that would allow redistricting, and the opposition was winning by 8 points. But that wasn't even a poll of registered voters. That was a poll of all Virginia adults. I mean, obviously they didn't reach all Virginia adults, but the sample was of all Virginia adults. Again, it was well before early voting started, which started on March 6th. And as a reminder, Election Day is on the 21st. All right, what, if anything, can we take from these polls? Well, it certainly doesn't look like a blowout either way. Can we say for certain that it's going to be close? No, we can't. I'd say the only thing we can say for certain about this redistricting referendum right now is that we have a whole lot of uncertainty. And a lot of that comes from the fact that it's probably an election where a lot of money isn't going to be spent. Some money is being spent, but not a lot. And it's not even taking place in the fall. It's taking place in the spring. Another part of what's leading to that uncertainty is the fact that, as I mentioned, these polls were taken of very broad samples in what is likely to be a very low turnout election. And so I just want to illustrate how important the shifting size of the denominators are here. When we think about that most recent poll, it was sampling a universe of all Virginia adults. There are 8.8 million Virginia adults. So let me give you some context as to how absurd an oversample that is for an election like this. There are 8.8 million adults in Virginia. Barely 6 million, not even 6 million of them are registered to vote. Do all registered voters always vote? No, dear God, no. In the last presidential election, 4.5 million people voted in Virginia. In last fall's gubernatorial election, a little over 3.4 million voted. In the last midterm election, barely 3 million voted. Now, we don't know how many are going to vote by April 21st. Maybe we could guess that it's going to be about 2.1 million, but you can probably hear in my voice all the uncertainty. No one knows how many people are going to show up in an election like this. But we sure as hell know that it's going to be less than a quarter of all the adults in Virginia. And so when you have early polls polling this enormous universe of people, it really doesn't tell us much. And so really the only thing we can be certain of is, as I said, uncertainty, and the turnout is going to be everything. We need to get the right people to show up. Because no matter what the numerators say in these polls, I can guarantee you that the pollsters are really confused and worried about who to actually sample, because they don't know what denominator to work with. Turnout is going to be everything. This is a race where denominators are much more important than numerators. We've got to get the right people to show up. All right, that brings me to what we are going to be doing at the Environmental Voter Project and how you can be involved as volunteers or donors in that important effort. We have individually identified And I mean that in the creepiest sense. We have individually identified 170,592 already registered voters in Virginia who are likely to list climate and the environment as their number one priority, yet we think that they are very unlikely to vote this spring without a really robust campaign mobilizing them to do so. We are going to be reaching out to them in 4 different ways. First, as a staff, we are creating and hopefully having the funds to pay for a very robust direct mail campaign using proven messaging that previous randomized control trials have showed us are really, really good at getting these low propensity voters to the polls. We are also, as a staff, running proven digital ad campaigns to get these people to the polls. All right, now here's where you come in. We are going to be phone banking. We have already started calling these voters because remember, we're on the 7th day of early voting. We are calling these voters with proven scripts to get them to the polls. This is an election that a lot of Virginians don't know about. They don't know about it yet. It could swing as many as 4 congressional seats. You could make an argument that this is the single most important election in the United States this year. And yet a lot of people, even in Virginia, don't know it's already started. We will also be doing door-to-door canvassing in the Arlington, Virginia area, just because we have such a dense population of these targets living in the greater Arlington area. And so it really makes sense and it's really efficient for people to knock on doors there as well. If you are interested in joining these efforts, please go to the link that is in the chat and sign up. We already have 8 phone banks scheduled. If you haven't phone banked with the Environmental Voter Project yet, I can tell you this. First, we provide all the training you will ever need at the beginning of every phone bank. If it takes you 10 minutes to get comfortable, great. If it takes you 60 minutes to get comfortable, great. Our trained phone bank leaders will hold your hand and do everything it takes to get you comfortable. Second thing to know, none of the voters will see your phone number. They will only see our phone number. Third thing you need to know, the scripts we give you are proven in randomized control trials to increase turnout. So we will tell you what to say. We will only give you stuff that has been proven to work in the past, and we will train you until you are comfortable doing it. And then finally, I will say, one of the best things about our organizing team is that within 24 hours of every phone bank, they email you and let you know the results from that phone bank. We know that it's a serious investment of your time and energy to be on one of these things, and we want you to know the results from them. If you're interested in door-to-door canvassing with us, we will also make sure that you have a proven script, proven literature, and that you are trained and feeling comfortable before you hit the doors. And our canvassing will be on April 18th in Arlington. And again, you can sign up at the link in the chat and you'll see exactly where we're meeting. And we would love to have you join us there. If you want all of these things, you can always find all of our volunteer opportunities at environmentalvoter.org/get-involved. We always have an absurdly large number of volunteer opportunities available. Finally, before we get to a quick Q&A, I do just want to say this is a crucially important election. We've got 5.5 weeks until Election Day, and we literally know all of our target voters by name and street address. We know who they are. We have their phone numbers. We can knock on their doors. And from hundreds of previous randomized control trials, we know what messages to deliver to them over the phone or through their door or in the mail or over digital ads in order to get them to vote. All we need is the funding to make it happen. And so this is it, guys. If you can imagine yourself this fall thinking, oh my God, I'm going to really care about that US House race, or I'm going to really care about that Senate race or that gubernatorial race, well, think about this opportunity right now. In a low turnout, low cost election, as many as 4 congressional seats might switch. This is an enormously high impact, high return opportunity for you. And so I ask you, click on the donate link that's being shared in the chat right now. The Environmental Voter Project is a 501c4 nonprofit. That means you can donate as much as you would like. There are no limits to it. We also love monthly donors as well if you want to spread out your donations over a few months. But any amount helps. We have donors who donate 4, 5, and 6 figures. We have donors who donate $5. It all helps. You can go to that link in the chat. And also, if you know how to use QR codes, you can just pick up your phone, press the camera app, and aim it at that little box with sort of the static in it, and you'll see a URL pop up, and just press it, and our donate link will pop up, and you can donate on your phone. But please consider donating generously. This is an enormous opportunity. Imagine it's not March right now, but rather it's the end of September, and you have the opportunity to support 4 congressional campaigns at once that no one knows about. That's what this opportunity is right now. And so please take a moment as we're doing Q&A to volunteer for a phone bank, or if you live in the Arlington, Virginia area, to volunteer for a canvas. And please don't just donate, but donate generously, because we aren't going to get the next 5.5 weeks back. This is a huge, huge moment in time for us to make a difference, and we'd really, really like your help. All right, Peter, do we have any questions?
How is early voting going right now? You said it's been happening already, so what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm glad someone asked. So the way that this happens is every day we get early voting data coming in. Now there's about a 24 to 36 hour delay. So when polls close on a particular day, by the next morning, that early voting data is available, and then it needs to flow through into our voter file software, and usually by that following evening or the next morning, we have it. And so we don't have 7 days of early voting data. We have about 5 days of early voting data, but we can see that, let me give you the exact number here. 72,145 people have already voted early in Virginia. How does that compare to what we would see in like a midterm or even last fall? Well, it's a lot less. It's a lot less. It's about 25% of what we were seeing at the beginning of early voting last fall. I don't know what that means. I'm not going to pretend as though I can predict what turnout is going to be, other than I think pretty darn low. But what I can say is we do know who these individuals are. We know who these 72,145 people are. And we know that 1,016 of them were among the low propensity climate first voters who were targeting at EVP. And so what that means is our phone banks are already working. We've already gotten 1,016 of these people to vote early. And the great thing about that is every day, well, I was going to say we, it isn't me, it's Peter, who you see on your screen right there. Every day, Peter, as our data director, removes our targets who have already voted. So when you're canvassing and knocking on doors, or when you're on the phones calling people, you don't have to waste any of your time calling people who we know have already voted. Again, we take your time and your investment really, really seriously. And so, boy, are we happy when someone voted, not just because it shows that one of our targets voted, but also because that means we can pull someone from our universe so that your time and money is even more efficient. All right, Peter, any other questions?
So you did a really good job of explaining the process over the course of this webinar. Could you distill it to what the immediate steps are? When is this referendum? When is the primary? And does this referendum take effect before the general election?
Great question. I'm so glad that someone asked because at least the second part of that question I didn't mention. Okay, so this referendum takes place on April 21st. So less than 6 weeks from right now, April 21st. Early voting has already begun. Over 70,000 people have already voted early. What this referendum will do is, if it passes, it will amend Virginia's state constitution to permit a new congressional map to be passed for the state of Virginia. We already know what that map is. That map will then, yes, go into effect in time for this year's midterms. So it will go into effect for this year's midterms. And to make sure that it does, the Virginia state legislature already pushed back the date of when their primaries usually are. So Virginia's primaries are usually, I think, in June. Is that right, Peter? Or early July? June. They pushed them back to August just because they wanted to make sure that people had time to file in the right new district if this passes. So if this passes, 4 districts will shift from red to light blue, and it will take place in time for this midterm election. What is the only caveat? It's what I brought up before, which is that the Virginia State Supreme Court may still decide in a whole bunch of lawsuits that actually, even though everybody voted, no, we can't let the new map take effect because it needs to have one more round of the state legislature vote on it. And boy, would that be frustrating. But that doesn't mean we can't work our rear ends off to make sure that the right people show up and vote in this supremely important election. Really, really good question, folks. Okay, I know we wanted to keep this a quick webinar, but Peter, do we have any other questions?
That's it. I think we're
Outstanding.
set.
Oh my gosh, that's how much we love respecting people's times. So, to close, please go to the links in the chat. There are multiple links in the chat. For those of you who are new to the Environmental Voter Project, you can see that Intro to EVP link in the chat. For those of you who are used to our work or are ready to get involved, sign up to volunteer for a phone bank. This is a really easy way to make an enormous difference at a moment in time when most people, let alone most Virginians, aren't paying attention. And then finally, take a moment to chip in. This is a really easy way for your donation to go a really long way. Thank you all so much. And boy, do we all look forward to seeing you on a phone bank or on the doors. Take care, everybody.